I never planned to come home early that Tuesday. The drive back from Sudbury was supposed to take another 3 hours at least, but the meeting with the contractors wrapped up faster than expected, and I figured, why not surprise her? Marion loves surprises. Small ones. The kind where I walk through the door and she's still in her garden cardigan, dirt on her hands, and she looks up like I'm the best thing she's seen all week. That was what I was thinking about on the 400 southbound. That look on her face. I'd been married to that woman for 38 years. 38 years of mortgage payments, and leaky eavesdrows and frozen pipes in January and the kind of quiet Sunday mornings that people write songs about. We built something together, Marion and I. Not just the house in Barrie, though yes, that too, but a life, a real one. The kind you don't fully appreciate until someone tries to take it from you. I pulled into the driveway just after 2 in the afternoon. Her car was there, so was her daughter's. And beside it, a silver SUV I didn't recognize. Quebec plates. I sat in the truck for a moment. Something felt off. I couldn't name it yet, but something in my chest went quiet the way it does when you're about to hear bad news and some part of you already knows. I grabbed my jacket off the passenger seat, left my bag in the truck. The front door was unlocked. I stepped into the front hall and heard voices coming from the living room. Not the kitchen where Marion usually sits this time of day, but the living room, which we only really use for company. I heard my daughter's voice first, low and careful, the way she talks when she's trying to convince someone of something. Then a man's voice I didn't recognize. And then, my wife, not talking, crying. That sound stopped me in the middle of the hallway like I'd hit a wall. I've heard Marion cry twice in our marriage. Once when her mother passed. Once when we lost the baby in 2001 and never talked about it again. Marion is not a woman who cries easily. She is steady and quiet and strong in ways that most people never notice because she doesn't announce it. So when I heard that sound coming from my own living room, this soft, broken sound, like she was trying to hold it in and couldn't, something went cold in me. I walked to the doorway. Marion was sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tight in her lap, her shoulders hunched forward. She had been crying for a while. I could tell by the way her eyes were red all the way to the temples. Our daughter, Caitlin, was sitting across from her in the armchair, my armchair, with a folder open on her knee. Beside her stood a man I'd never seen before. Late 40s, expensive jacket, hair gelled back. And next to him, a woman about the same age, arms crossed, watching Marion the way you watch someone you've already decided is an obstacle. These were Caitlin's in-laws, her husband Rémi's parents, who lived in Montreal, and whom I had met exactly 3 times over 6 years of marriage. 3 times in 6 years, and now here they were in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon when they thought I was in Sudbury. The man had a document in his hand. I stood in the doorway for a moment without anyone noticing me, long enough to hear him say, in this smooth, patient tone, like he was explaining something very simple to someone very slow, "It's just a formality, Marion. A transfer of title into a family trust. It protects everyone. It protects you." And I watched my wife wipe her face with the back of her hand and say, I don't understand why we need to do this now. I'd like to wait for Edward." "Edward isn't here," my daughter said, gently. "And this is actually easier without him, Mom. You know how he gets." "You know how he gets." I stepped into the room. 4 heads turned. Marion looked up, and I will never forget this. Her face did something I hadn't seen in years. It crumpled with relief, pure the way a child looks when a parent finally walks into the room. Like she'd been holding her breath for an hour and could finally let it go. "Edward," she said. "I'm here," I said. That was all. The man with the folder straightened up. His wife, Rémi's mother, Sylviane, though I barely knew her name, uncrossed her arms slowly. Caitlin closed the folder on her knee. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Rémi's father, this man named Jael, smiled at me. The kind of smile that's trying very hard to look like it has nothing to hide. "Edward, we weren't expecting you." "No," I said. "I imagine not." I walked over to Marion and sat down beside her on the couch. I put my hand over both of hers. They were cold. I could feel her trembling slightly, just slightly in the way she does when she's been upset for a long time and is trying very hard not to show it. "Can someone tell me what's happening in my living room?" I said. Caitlin started talking first. She had rehearsed this, I could tell. The words came out shaped, practiced. She talked about Rémi's business, a restaurant group he'd been expanding across the province, and how they'd run into some cash flow difficulties. Temporary, she kept saying, completely temporary, and how the bank had been difficult about a second loan, and how Giles had suggested that if there were family assets that could be used as collateral. She stopped. She looked at the folder in her lap. "We were going to talk to you about it together," she said, "but you were supposed to be in Sudbury." "I was," I said, "and now I'm home, so talk to me." What came out over the next 20 minutes was this. Ramey's restaurant group was not doing temporarily poorly. It was failing. He owed nearly $400,000 to suppliers, to the landlord on his Queen Street location, to a private investor whose name I didn't recognize and didn't like the sound of. The bank had already declined the loan. Gilles and his wife had apparently put up what they could, but it wasn't enough, and someone, I still don't know exactly who first said the words, had decided that the next logical step was Marion. Not both of us, just Marion, because Caitlin knew I would say no. So they had come on a Tuesday afternoon, with a folder of documents that included a transfer of title, our house, our home on Fernwood Crescent that we'd owned outright since 2019, no mortgage, paid off early after 30 years of careful living, into something called a family trust that Gilles' lawyer in Montreal had apparently drawn up. A family trust in Montreal, under Quebec provincial law. Marion didn't understand the documents. She has a grade 12 diploma, and she is one of the most capable human beings I have ever known, but she is not a woman who reads legal documents, and nobody in that room had been helping her understand them. Gilles had been explaining, smoothly, patiently, in that tone that treats confusion as consent. She had been asking to wait for me. They had been telling her I would just complicate things. I sat there, and I let all of that settle into me. I breathed it in slowly. I felt Marion's hands under mine, still cold, still slightly trembling. I thought about the 30 years of mortgage payments. I thought about the winter we refinanced to put Caitlin through her first 2 years at Laurier. I thought about the summer we drove to Cape Breton with nothing but a tent and a cooler because that was all we could afford that year. I thought about the look on Marion's face when I'd walked in the door. Then I looked at my daughter. She was watching me carefully. There were things moving across her face. Guilt was one of them. I know my daughter's face. I've known it since she was 3 days old. The guilt was there, but so was something else, something harder. Something that said she had decided this was necessary and had found a way to live with that. That was the part that would take me a long time to forgive. I said, "Caitlin, I need you to listen to me very carefully." She straightened slightly. "Your mother and I are not collateral," I said. "We are not a financial instrument. We are not a solution to Ramey's problems. And this house that your mother and I have paid for and maintained and lived in for 26 years, is not going into any trust in Montreal or anywhere else." Jill started to say something. I held up one hand. "I wasn't finished," I said. He stopped. I told him I would like him and his wife to leave my home. I said it quietly, which is the only way I know how to say things when I'm truly angry. I said I understood they were worried about their son. I said I was sorry about what Ramey was going through. I said none of that changes what I just said, and I'd like them to leave now. Gilles looked at Caitlin. Caitlin looked at the folder. The folder did not offer any suggestions. They left. Sylviane said something under her breath in French as she walked past me. I don't speak French well, but I recognized the tone. I let it go. When the door closed, Marion let out a long breath and put her head on my shoulder. We sat like that for a few minutes without saying anything. I could hear the silver SUV backing out of the driveway. Then I said, "How long had they been here?" "Since noon," she said. 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in her own living room while people tried to convince her to sign away the only real security she had. 2 hours of asking to wait for me and being told I would just make things difficult. 2 hours of being slowly, carefully, very politely worn down. I thought about that for a long time after. I called our family lawyer the next morning. Her name is Brenda, and she's been handling our affairs since we refinanced in 1998, and she is exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when something like this happens. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate most about Brenda. Then she said, "Edward, do you know if they recorded any of that conversation?" I said I didn't know. She said it didn't matter for our immediate purposes, because nothing had been signed. She also said, and I want to be precise about this because it's important, that what they had attempted, depending on how the conversation had gone, could potentially constitute undue influence under Ontario law. Not fraud exactly, not necessarily criminal, but not nothing either. She advised us to document everything Marion remembered, date, time, what was said, who was present. We spent an evening at the kitchen table doing exactly that. Marion talking slowly, and me writing it all down in longhand in a notebook. By the time we finished, Marion was exhausted, and I was furious in the way I can only be furious after the fact, when the danger has passed, and there's nothing left to do with the feeling. I also did something Brenda didn't suggest, but that I'd been thinking about since the night before. I called the number of that private investor, the name from the list of debts Caitlin had mentioned. I'd written it down while she was talking. His name was Ted, and he ran a small investment firm out of Vaughan, and when I told him who I was and what had happened, there was a long pause on his end of the line. Then he said, "So Ramey didn't secure anything?" I said no. He hadn't. There was another pause. Ted said, "I think we need to have a conversation." We did. I won't go into the details of that conversation, except to say that, by the end of it, I understood the shape of what Ramey had built and what he owed, and to whom, and I understood that we were not the first family asset someone had looked at. Ramey's parents had apparently already signed over a lien on their own property in Laval, which explained why they'd come to us. They had already given what they had, and it hadn't been enough. I thought about that too. Caitlin called me 3 days later. It was a Sunday evening, and Marion had gone to bed early, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She said, "Dad, I need to explain." I said, "I know you do." She talked for a long time, about Ramey, about how the last 2 years had been for them, which I hadn't fully known because they hadn't told us. About the nights she'd spent going through the numbers and not finding a way out. About how Giles had presented this as a solution and how she'd let herself believe it because she didn't know what else to do. She cried a little. I let her. Then I said, "Caitlin, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." She said, "Okay." I said, "Did you know your mother would be alone that afternoon?" A pause. "Yes," she said. "Did you choose to come on a Tuesday because you knew I'd be in Sudbury?" Another pause. "Yes," she said. I sat with that for a moment. "Okay," I said. "Thank you for telling me the truth." She asked if I was going to forgive her. I told her I didn't know yet, which was the most honest answer I had. I told her forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting, and it wasn't the same as pretending nothing happened, and it didn't mean I would ever put Marion in a room again with people who were trying to manipulate her. She said she understood. I told her I hoped so. Ramey's business did not survive. By March it was in receivership. The restaurants closed one by one. First the Barrie location, then the 2 in Mississauga, finally the one in Toronto. I read about it in the local paper and felt something complicated that I still don't have a word for. Not satisfaction. Not quite. Something closer to a specific and particular sadness. Caitlin and Ramey separated in the spring. She didn't tell us for 2 months. When she finally did, she drove up to Barrie on a Saturday morning and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Marion and I had written everything down in that notebook and told us. And then she stayed for lunch and we talked about other things, easier things, the way families sometimes do when the hard thing has already been said. Marion made soup. That's the thing about Marion. Even after everything, she made soup. I watch her sometimes, in the kitchen or in the garden, or just sitting at the table with her crossword, and I think about that Tuesday afternoon. I think about what it cost her to sit in that room for 2 hours without calling me, because she hadn't wanted to interrupt the meeting. I think about how close it came. A signature. That's all it would have taken. 1 page. Our home is still ours. We had the locks changed, not because of Caitlin, but because Ramey had a key, and I wasn't comfortable with that anymore. We updated our wills. We had a conversation with Brenda about powers of attorney and what they actually mean and who holds them and under what conditions. Those are conversations we probably should have had earlier, and I won't pretend otherwise. Marion asked me once, a few months later, whether I wished I'd stayed in Sudbury that night. Let the meeting finish. Driven back the next morning as planned. I didn't have to think about it. I told her there is no version of my life where I would choose not to have come home to her. She laughed a little. That small, private laugh she has. "Even though it was a mess?" she said. "Even though?" I said. The truth is, and I've thought about this more than I probably should, the mess was never really about the house. The house is just a house. Wood and drywall and 30 years of small repairs and a garden Marion has been tending since before the kids were in school. It matters because of what it represents, not because of what it's worth on paper. What it represents is this. Marion and I chose each other. We chose this life. We chose to build something together, slowly, carefully, year by year, The way people used to build things, without shortcuts. Nobody gets to take that. Not for $400,000. Not for $4 million. Not for anything. I still drive up to Sudbury now and then for work. The 400 northbound, straight shot, same as always. On the way home I think about the turnoff at Barry, and I think about our street, and I think about pulling into the driveway and seeing the light on in the kitchen. That light. After everything, it's still the best thing I see all week.